The Winnipeg Jets are preparing to close out their preseason with just two more games, including tonight's matchup against the Minnesota Wild. What should we prepare for on tonight's show of Locked On Winnipeg Jets?
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's show, we have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about the upcoming preseason game this evening against Minnesota, kind of how that's all going to shape up, maybe some changes. We'll also talk through some of the preseason stocks for players, who's really risen up, who's kind of stayed the same, and who might be trending a little bit more downwards. Finally, I also want to talk about Ville Heinola. I mentioned him on the previous episode or so. I want to chat about why this is probably his last real chance to make the NHL at this point, and how that could potentially look if he actually does make the cut. First, though, Minnesota, Winnipeg. This is one of the last two preseason games, and then the Jets will open their actual real season on October 9th at home against the team that unfortunately unseeded them out of last year's playoffs. But for tonight's game, I think the main thing that I'm going to be looking for is two things, right? The first is, how will this Jets top nine be arranged? I have a pretty strong feeling that the couple of lines that we've seen with Nemesnikov, Taves, and Scheifele, those previous combinations will probably be what the Jets do. You'll have CSV likely as your first line, your second line, Perfetti, Nyquist, and Taves, and then on the third, something like Niederreiter, Vlad, and then probably Iafallo. This top nine is okay, right? Like, I think it'll get the job done. I think it's going to be very forecheck heavy and probably one of those that maybe struggles to create a lot of 5v5 offense. But overall, I mean, I think it'll be decent. You know me, I often look more at the playoffs than I do the regular season, because I think the regular season is where the Jets already have the formula pretty much perfected. You sit there, you grind out 82 games, although next year it'll be, 84? You'll be one of those teams that's kind of will over elite skill, and I think the Jets have generally done a great job of that the past couple of years, where they're tight defensively, they can do enough to squeeze out and grind out goals, and they just have a desire to outlast their opponents, which I think they've done, especially this past year under Arneal. We even had a crazy win streak and really one of the best records to start the season that we've ever seen in league history. Now, though, things are about to change, and the Jets are going to have to sort of adapt to that. You've got a lot of new veterans here. You've got a very different top nine than you did last year. And yes, I know Ehlers and Appleton may have been used in various ways. We're not going to see the same kinds of players taking their place, though. And so it's going to be an interesting adjustment to see how the Jets react to that. Will Taves be able to keep up for 60 minutes? How will his deployments work as we start getting into the regular season? I think in the last game or so, we sort of saw maybe where his lack of foot speed is potentially going to be something that pops up throughout the season. He's got really good supports in a guy like Perfetti, and Nyquist is looking to kind of reestablish himself. He didn't have the last year or so work out pretty well, but he did have a recently good season with Nashville. So can he kind of go back to those Preds days of being a really good poacher? We're going to just have to wait and see. I think the other area that I'm also kind of keeping an eye on is the fourth line, right? The fourth line has a fair bit of competition. I do think that the line that we saw earlier of Barron, Koepka, and Pearson is likely to be the line. This game and probably the game against Calgary will be our big tell of who, Arneal really is impressed with. But the fact that Chenoweth was talking about Pearson on the PK a couple of days ago, to me, already says that they've made up their mind. I really don't agree with this, though. I don't think Pearson, for me, should be the guy to put on your fourth line. I would like to see someone like Gustafsson or Ford or one of these other options. I think the Jets actually have better improvements that they can make internally. But I know how they view this whole veteran thing. I know the experience is always very important to them. But like with Pearson, if his skating was like league average, I really wouldn't be concerned about it. His skating's not league average. It's well below that now. And it was very noticeable in the first couple of preseason games that he just can't keep up the way he used to. As somebody who was actually a very big Pearson fan, like this hurts to say. I used to love watching him do his work for the Kings. I think, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we'd be having a very different conversation. But where Pearson is at this stage of his career, I just don't know if it's going to work with what you really need Winnipeg to do. That fourth line has to be one that you can rely on to get the puck up the ice, to defend well, and I'm just not sure that Pearson contributes to that in the way that you'd need. But maybe he's got a surprise in store. He can still shoot and pass very well. Like, it's clear everything up here and with his hands are still really good. It's just the foot speed that's kind of an issue right now. So hopefully he can find a way to compensate. He's got a ton of winning experience. He's one of the few guys on the Jets roster that's got a ring or two. So if he can parlay that into more success, more power to him. The final thing that I'm going to be keeping a close eye on, though, and really the more unexpected thing, is what happens with the Samberg pairing. I know how Arniel has done this before, and we've seen it, but like the Jets were not good when Samberg was out. Like, he is one of the linchpins of this defense, and I really don't know how you compensate for that. Fleury Pionk is not it. I appreciate what Fleury does, and I know he fights for the badge, but he cannot play on that second pairing with Pionk. I just don't think that pairing really works that well. And I don't really know who else can really do it. My only feeling is maybe you try a Miller on his offhand. Miller Pionk might be the closest that you can get, and there will still be warts with that pairing. But at least Miller is a guy that I would feel a little more comfortable with, right? He's a trusted NHLer. He's done this job for many, many years. He's a solid second or third pairing guy. Again, it's not really how I would want to do it. And Miller himself does have this habit of shooting the puck a little too much, sometimes right into coverage that gets a rebound turned into a counter against. But given the options, I just don't really know what else you do. The only other thing that I could see potentially happening is like a Heinola-Pionk pairing, but like that's really fantasy stuff, right? Heinola doesn't really play a lot. You already know that I'm going to talk about this really being his last chance to make the Jets. So, the other options are just not really that savory. You've got Stanley and Pionk, which I would not do. You could do Shen and Pionk. Again, I wouldn't do it. You just don't really have many choices. Unless Salamonson somehow gets onto this team in light of the injury situation, which I can't even imagine how that would even happen without somebody getting waived. I just don't think the Jets really have a replacement for Samberg. And so what they do in these final couple of preseason games, both tonight and on Friday, will be very telling. Will they do Fleury Pionk again? Will they try something else? The something else doesn't really fill me with a lot of confidence, but you gotta find some sort of solution. I don't know what it is. They've also got Cale Clegg, and maybe he has done enough to get some looks from the Jets coaching staff. My own opinion is that he didn't really impress so far, and I can kind of see why he sort of bounced around between the NHL and AHL. But, I guess barring any other solution, I just don't know what you do, man. You don't have a replacement for Samberg. He is kind of one-on-one on this team, and without him, it's going to be a bit of a dicier situation. So a lot to keep a close eye on. We'll just have to wait and see. But speaking of preseason and stuff, I also want to talk about whose preseason stocks are high, who's kind of declined a bit, and who really hasn't changed much at all. We'll dive into some of the biggest and most notable performances coming right up. Before we do, though, I wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Whether you're somebody who thinks the Ravens might finally turn their season around, or perhaps you believe Carson Wentz is on the comeback tour of the century where he's ready to resurrect his career with Minnesota, the only way that you can get in on the action is by going to FanDuel.com and downloading the FanDuel app right now to get started. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're doing same game parlays or jumping in live as the action is unfolding on your TV. And again, if your first $5 bet wins, that's $300 in bonus bets to keep your winning going. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. See ya on the app. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we're chatting about sort of preseason takeaways, rising stocks, perhaps falling stocks, maybe some folks who haven't really changed either way. Let's talk about the biggest risers. So the first one for me is going to be Colby Barlow. I think Barlow has really boosted his stock significantly. Now, he won't play in the NHL this season, barring like a crazy surprise, maybe like an end-of-the-year sort of reward for a big season with the Moose. But I think he has done enough to prove that he looks pro-ready. That was not really my expectation coming into this camp, but I think given what we've seen already with him, I came away happy. I thought he looked really good. This is the most improved I've seen him play from any of the prospect games from last year. Up until now, this is like a totally more engaged, more proactive, and more creative player all around. And I really feel like that is a testament to all the work that Barlow has done this offseason. He looks refreshed, renewed, and ready to go. Speaking of which, a guy he might play with this year, Danny Zhokin. If there was a guy who deserved like the most improved award, Zhokin has to be it. Even compared to his previous preseason and camp performances in other years, he came out and was just shot out of a cannon this preseason. I have never seen him play like this before, and he was just a man possessed. He was forechecking aggressively, creating tons of good shooting and passing lanes, scoring goals left and right, stealing hearts and minds. He was just unbelievable. And this was really his preseason to lose. Now, look, it's not going to mean that he's going to score 2 to 3 points every single night with Manitoba, but bear in mind, this guy had 2 years ago, I think, a very injury-riddled season. Then last year, he was on a Moose team that was awful, and he really struggled. We had 10 points in 30-odd games, maybe even less than that. That's very uncharacteristic for the kind of player that he was when he was with Guelph. Now he finally looks like the Zhokin that I was expecting. Fast, efficient, skilled. He's got that layer of creativity, the relentless motor. The Jets have recently drafted a lot of these types with Kevin He, Owen Martin a little bit. You've got some of that. You've got this with Zhokin. I just think that there's the sort of archetype that Zhokin fits that easily projects to be an NHLer in your middle or bottom six. But, the past couple of years, it was sort of trending to Zhokin not really making the NHL at all. And so this preseason really was kind of a coming out party for him. And oh boy, if this is what we see from him with the Moose this year, he might be on the fast track to the NHL sooner than later. So really impressed with him, really rooting for him to do well. He is very much one of my rapid risers in player stocks. So happy that he has hit the ground running and very excited for him. Also going to give rising stocks to Kevin He. Kevin, especially in his last game or two, looked a lot more refined, a lot more pro-ready, and obviously this is his last year with Niagara, but once he's done, should the Moose still be around and in the playoffs, I wouldn't be shocked if he, starts making the team. He's energetic, he skates well, he had a couple of really nifty passes and plays, thought he had a couple of dangerous shots and scoring opportunities, one of which he just barely missed in front of goal. All that stuff I feel like is trending in the right direction. Some of the goals that he scored in juniors don't always project to be the kinds that you score with, pro level players, whether it's defenders or goalies. But I think what he's been showing and developing looks a lot more projectable to the NHL and AHL. So I expect him to be a really fun player. I think he's going to be, well, he already is a fan favorite. Everyone obviously kind of has nicknames for him around his last name, but I just think he's got the leadership and quality that I think is going to make for a really fun player at some point for the Jets. Stocks that haven't really changed. Lambert, I think, is probably in this category. I think Brad needed to come out and demonstrate that he is still a quality prospect, and I think he did. I don't think he really set the world on fire, but I think he played really, really well. And I think it was more on the understated details that I noticed him the most. Some of his defensive work I think was very solid. I think his transition game showed well. He made some really smart decisions inside the offensive zone. Where I think he's still trying to catch up a little bit is, when he's maybe the first guy in the OZ, how do you prevent yourself from getting isolated and, turning the puck over? That is something that he still does. Also, like in the D zone, he is still a bit passive. Sometimes he'll not necessarily shut down or man mark as aggressively, which I think, isn't the worst if you can channel that into some smart reads, but he doesn't always do that. So there's stuff for him to work on. But overall, I came away with a fairly positive impression. I just don't think that it's necessarily raised or lowered a stock either way. I think he still tracks to be a pretty solid middle six contributor. I think he'll be a good winger for the Jets. I think his days as a center are probably numbered. I just don't see him making the NHL down the middle. Unless he has like a slam banging big year for Manitoba this year as a center, which doesn't seem super likely, but could happen. I think he'll probably be an NHL caliber winger. Maybe he doesn't do what Ehlers did back then, but he probably has the closest skill set to anyone of this Jets pool that can do that. And again, they are very different players, so it doesn't quite feel that fair to compare them. But when you have somebody who has the edge work that Lambert does, the comparisons just sort of invite themselves. So really hoping for a big year from him. I've always been a big fan and believer of his. I just need to see that extra layer and extra level from him to really take his game from just being very good to sort of not necessarily next level, but maybe really getting himself back in the good graces of the Jets brass. I believe in him still. I think he's a fun player, and I hope that he can really do something special. Also, on stocks that didn't necessarily move, Elias Salamanson, like his stocks are already so high that he would have to just blow the roof off to actually be any better than he already is. And I don't know that he necessarily did that. Like he wasn't putting up Erik Karlsson results, but for what he did in preseason, man, he was a beast. I've always been very high on him. I think he's just continued to showcase what I sort of expected out of him. And I really don't see any reason not to think he's a top 4 player in the very near future. I think next year he'll probably make the team. He is one of the most exciting prospects in this pool, and I cannot wait to see what he does in a full-time Jets deployment. If we have guys whose stocks are maybe falling, this feels weird to say because it's not like either of their stocks are really changing all that much, but like Stanley and Fleury, I don't think really showed super, super well in camp so far. A lot of the decision-making and stuff that's kind of hurt them the past couple of years kind of showed up again. I mean, it's not really shocking as much as you'd want them to really be shutdown types. They do struggle with that, and I don't think it's a surprise that some of the worst shifts kind of happened when they were trying to, man mark and stuff. It's just not really in their game. And so, like, in terms of the third pairing, ideally, I think you'd have somebody with more mobility and puck moving ability there rather than, having a couple of really big, tall guys who struggle with the defensive part of the game. I'm not going to sit here and say Heinola is going to be the shutdown dude because he's not. That's never been his game. But I think if you have, say, Shen or Miller on the right side, get them a partner who can actually move the puck well. Find somebody who can make really good stretch passes consistently and who has the vision and IQ to make really good choices when you're trying to exit the D zone. I think Shen can work very well if you have the right partner, but so far, the Jets haven't necessarily given him the partner that makes a lot of sense. So it is what it is. I'm not really shocked by it. It just is part of the game, and I know how the Jets kind of are. So going to be an interesting one over the next couple of weeks. Obviously, the Jets are going to continue to winnow down this camp this week and really in the final preseason game or so. We'll know what their hand is probably by the end of tonight and on Friday. We'll know what their I guess, projected lines are. Probably going to be pretty similar to what we had coming into camp, barring the new Sandberg injury. So, man, I really hope the injury is short-term because that is a guy they do not want to live without for very long. Now, I mentioned Heinola just a little bit ago. I want to talk about why this is probably his last real shot to make the NHL, especially as a member of the Winnipeg Jets. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's closing thoughts as we're just wrapping up really quickly with some final thoughts on, this is going to be, I would argue, Ville Heinola's last real chance to make the NHL. There is an opportunity that maybe if he gets waived, that some other team out there actually gives him a real shot, but I'm going to be real with you. I doubt that actually happens. I think if Heinola does not make the Jets out of camp this year, which is going to change now because you have the Sandberg injury, you don't have to waive as many as you originally needed to. But assuming, he gets waived when Sandberg's back, I just don't know where he goes from this point. The Athletic under Muratatesh just put out an article where Heinola was sort of talking about the grind and trying to make the league at this stage of his career. And he's spent a lot of time having press box popcorn, trying his best in some games where he'd maybe do too much, or other games where he was very conservative and made small, smart plays, but nothing that really stood out. And with him, I often feel like the expectations for him just don't really align with how they viewed other Jets prospects. Stanley in particular, I think, is one of the most interesting examples because Logan really does struggle with a lot of the basic things. When you look at his lateral passing, for instance, he oftentimes sends the puck right to an opposing skater and gets himself into trouble. Or when he's on the PK, he pinches and pulls himself out of a passing or shooting lane in a marking situation that you don't want to do, because then it just opens that shooter that you were supposed to be handling for an easy shot. He did that earlier in preseason. It led to a goal against. And I just don't know why Heinola is held to a different standard then. When Heinola makes a mistake, he's often gotten benched. And I struggle to understand why, the Jets don't want more puck moving ability, because I think with this team and how the Jets are built, size is great if it's actually good enough to move the puck, but size cannot be your only defining trait. If all you are is big, it's not really helpful when you need to get the puck out of the D zone. Yeah, you'll take up some more space and you might block a few extra shots, but the Jets need more ability to actually advance the puck and get up the ice. And that's where I think the Jets have, unfortunately, the past few years, really struggled to recognize that. They don't have D pairings outside of the top and maybe the second pairing that necessarily do that. And so, Heinola, this is really his last chance to impress and make some sort of a mark on this team. And I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's, viewed as undersized. I don't think that Arniel is overly fond of him, unless there's a really big surprise and, the Jets have this transformative revelation about how they want their third pairing to be. I think Ville's probably going to be your press box guy. I think Fleury is ahead of him in the pecking order. I think Stanley is too, for some reason. The Jets really love Logan to a point where, they don't even want to waive him or trade him. And it's not like this is like a Winnipeg specific thing. I think of Eric Brandstrom and how his career sort of went all over the place, never really found a home, despite the fact that when he was on the ice, their team usually controlled scoring chances. He still, I think, is overseas in Finland or Sweden or something. Guys like him increasingly just don't seem to have a home in the NHL. If you're under 6'2", and your primary game is puck moving and offense, it just doesn't seem like NHL teams are as interested in this, which is kind of weird to me because, Elias Salomonsson is very much a very similar player to Heinola with a few extra tweaks, and they seem to love Salomonsson. So I don't really know why Heinola isn't viewed the same way. Ville, in his teenage years, was one of the most exciting D prospects I think you could pick up, and yet he's just never really been given a chance to actually shine. So now that we're sort of kind of winding down preseason and it doesn't really feel like Heinola has an inside track on anything, I just don't really see a future for him in North America. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets waived at some point and decides to either, finish out this final year with the Moose, or maybe he just makes the move overseas. I think we've kind of reached the point where, either it's this year or it's never, and I think it's probably never. Uh, I feel bad because like Ville has had to sit through a lot of stuff over the past couple of years. Had he not broken his ankle last season, before he was really supposed to, or like the year before last, before he was really supposed to make it, maybe we'd have a different conversation. But he finally had a healthier year last year, and he only played a handful of 20 games, something like that. So I just don't think the Jets really view him all that highly anymore. And maybe it's time for both parties to head their separate ways. I think Heinola needs a fresh start somewhere. I don't think it's going to be in the NHL, unfortunately. I think he'll have to go back overseas in order to have some sort of a routine pro deployment. Maybe that's what it'll take for some team to recognize the skill and ability that he has. I think if a team is smart and has maybe not the best blue line, Heinola is a really cheap pickup that is worth giving a real chance to. Uh, Minnesota's done that the past couple of years with the Jets. They took Declan Chisholm. You also saw Kovacevic go to New Jersey. And Covey has ended up becoming one of the best shutdown defenders in the NHL. So I don't think that Heinola will ever quite do that. But if he has a sort of Chisholm second pairing or third pairing career for some team that maybe lacks a lot of elite blue line, I don't think I would be surprised by that. I do think that there's still a good player in there. I just don't think it's going to happen with Winnipeg. I think, come Sandberg's health eventually being, clear to play, and they have to waive somebody, I think Heinola probably gets sent down. And it'd be great if a team claims him and gives him a real shot, but, how many NHL teams out there do you really think look at Heinola as their missing link? Probably none of them. And I think that's going to be the trend as teams want more and more size, more and more physical strength, and just sort of these big, tall defenders who they don't seem to care if they skate well or not. They just want them. So it'll be interesting. We'll have to wait and see, but hoping that Heinola can do something to show somebody somewhere out there that he deserves a real chance. But curious to know your thoughts on this. Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We will have coverage of Winnipeg versus Minnesota on tomorrow night's episode, so see you then. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.